Yo, so today's video is about mistakes that beginners make. Every beginner makes. All of us make mistakes, especially like when you're new to something. Making mistakes should be expected. So, let's start. The first one would be focusing on weight over form. Now, I'm sure all of the science based lifters are like, applauding their hands, throwing off their panties. All of the ego lifters, are tossing their some Samsula caps onto the ground, raging in. But, focusing on weight over form is a big thing I've seen in terms of beginners, my own journey, my friends, random people in the gym, where it's very easy when you begin to focus too much on your ego. You want to be the strong guy, you want to be stronger in general. So you might just slap on a weight that you can't handle and just, do the pull down and you're like pulling your whole body down, or you're doing a curl and it's not a bicep curl, it's a spine curl the way that you're doing it. You're doing everything. You're doing way more than you can actually handle. And the issue with that is that you don't even the main one puts you at such a huge risk of injury. Like the worst form that you're doing something, especially like the heavier the weight goes, the more you risk yourself just getting injured. And then it also you don't learn the proper form, because the thing is some form breakdown is okay, like at the later sets, your last sets, the later reps, it's okay to like have some form of form breakdown. But the same way with how in arts you can't break the rules if you don't know them, you can't break the rule, not even break, you can't bend the rules if you don't know them. If you can't even do things within the rules, then how are you going to bend them effectively? Same thing with exercise. You can't bend your form without, you can't bend form if you don't even know how to do the proper form. You got to be able to start from a good, solid base in terms of your form, and then you can like play around a bit. Then you can be like, oh, I'm a cheat a bit here and cheat here, and it be like purposeful, like you're cheating, it's on purpose. You're like, um you like, the I know that I'm cheating for the sake of like going to absolute failure, rather than I'm cheating for the sake of I lifted too heavy to begin with and I really just should have lightened the weight a bit. So, weight over form. Now the second mistake beginners make is form over weights. They focus too much on form over weights. Now that might seem a bit counterintuitive, but what I mean by that is that a lot of science-based lifters, they focus too much on the form to the point where it detriments their overall progress, because they're not being intense enough. They worry too much about how solid their form is, that they end up not pushing themselves more than they need to. Because when you push yourself, that's when your form starts to break down. You break down a bit, then that's how you're like around the end of how much you can do. But if you focused on only doing perfect, then you'll end up in a case where you just don't push yourself hard enough. So your progressive overload is like slowed, because you're not like overloading. You're not doing the overloading part. You might progress a bit just because, by virtue of doing a certain weight enough times, you'll get stronger. But it's not as effective as like having both. You want to have both. You want to focus on form enough that you don't get injured and that you have good form, but you also want to focus enough on weight that you push yourself to like make actual progress. Because if you focus on one, you'll get injured, and if you focus on the other, then you'll just have slowed progress. But if you focus on both, you'll have good progress, because you start off, you're doing the form great, but you have enough, you're not like too stressed enough about it enough that like at the end you'll be doing some cheat reps, which will mean that you'll get stronger, as you go, because you're pushing yourself. So those are like the two kind of counterintuitive, and I'd say main applies to everyone ones. The third one is not focusing on your diet. I know it's a huge problem, not even for beginners, for like a lot of veterans sounds weird, but like I guess in terms of time, like veteran lifters, they don't focus at all on their diets, and they wonder why they don't look good. A lot of people don't put enough. Everyone knows the saying, abs are made in the kitchen, right? But the thing is, no one like people don't use it enough, like common sense wise. You'll be trying to like reach a certain goal in terms of aesthetics, but you're not actually focusing on, like, at least I'm projecting here. I'm projecting the freak out of this, right? I know I said in my last video that like my goal was to gain just gain so much muscle that like it overrided the fat. But at some point, like, I really should have started focusing on my diet. Like, even if it's not like about changing the diet, but even doing something simple like building the habit of tracking my diet. Because by purely building the habit of tracking, I'd get interested in like optimization. I'd be like, oh, okay, I don't eat as much protein as I'd like to, so let me like increase it by like changing up my meals a bit or something. Just focusing on your diet will make your life much easier, especially like when it's time to cut. Because if you're already in the habit of like tracking, then all it really is just reducing how much you're eating. But you don't also need to build the new habit of like making sure that you're eating how much you think you're eating. Um, so yeah, that's the tracking. And then the last one, the fourth one, would be focusing on intensity over consistency. Now, this is going to sound weird based off of all the other things that I said about intensity, but a lot of people do this, and it's why they don't make progress, which is that when they get into lifting or any real form of exercise, they'll start off doing the things that the people who've been doing it for long do. You'll join a class, you'll join like a Zumba class or like a spinning class, and you as a beginner are doing like the same intensity and stuff as someone who goes there every what's it called, every week, every day. You're doing the exact same thing. And as much as that might make you feel accomplished, and you're like, wow, I'm with this class, I'm pushing myself so hard, you can tell your friends that you go to the gym and you push yourself so hard, because you yourself haven't built the habit, you yourself are a beginner, you're gonna drop out. It's not gonna be a long-term thing just because you haven't spent any time building up to it. You need to spend time building up to things. That's where consistency over intensity comes. It's the same way if you're trying to get your friend into the gym, you wouldn't stress too much about like, if you were okay, maybe not your friend, because your friend probably just copies what you do. But like, if you were trying to actually, no, yeah, this works. If you're getting your friend into the gym, you don't start off like by pushing him crazy with the weights and stuff. You get him a weight that he can do calm for 10, and then you let him do it. You just correct his form and all that. But in terms of weights, he just does the amount that he needs to do 10, does that everywhere, and then he comes back tomorrow, does the next exercises tomorrow, next exercises next week, comes back, then maybe on week 2, that's when you start pushing a bit. But you don't have him come off the bat, find out his 1 rep max, then go down and have him pushing to failure every single set. You don't do that like with a new person, because they need time to actually build the habit. Or at least like, get through the first 2 weeks or so, just going through the motions, and then you can start pushing them. And it's the same way with yourself. You don't get into the gym. If you get into the gym and do all the hard stuff, you'll wake up tomorrow and you'll feel like ass. And you know what happens when you feel like ass? You don't do the new thing that you just started. You want to be able to go to the gym. You feel a bit of pain, the bit of DOMS because you don't exercise, but you don't want it to be enough that it just like cripples you. You can do that crippling stuff when you're like used to working out, when you enjoy working out. But at the beginning, you want to just do enough so that you can get the habit, basically. Wait, I'm gonna pause real quick. All right, I'm back. Just had to say goodnight to my mom. But you just want to do enough that you get the habit in. You want to become consistent. Focus on consistency, because the person who makes the most progress isn't the person who like has the best workouts or even like pushes himself as much. It's the person who shows up the most. If you show up the most, like if you're against someone who like goes to the gym, he pushes himself to the max, but he only goes to the gym like once every 2 weeks. Once every 2 weeks, pushes himself to the max, pulls up. Some weeks he misses, some weeks all that, and you're just a guy who does it moderately, moderate intensity, moderate everything, but you just show up all the time. You show up on all the days. Maybe you have like a 3 week, no, 3 day program. Maybe you have the simple push pull legs, rest, push pull legs. Show up 6 times a week, just doing like what people would be like, oh, you're not even trying that hard. You know, you're trying hard enough that you feel like you're exercising, but you're not trying crazy hard. You'll make better progress purely because you show up more. You know, you show up on the days that you're supposed to show up more. So you'll just have more hours accumulated within the gym doing what you're supposed to be doing. It's the same thing with diets, you know. There's the two guys, the one guy that does the most intense diets, but like he can only do it like 2 days of the week, you know, and but then there's the guy who like does a more maintainable for him diet, and he does that every day, and he'll get more progress than the other guy just because he shows up more, he puts in more hours into the grind. So yeah, that's the mistakes that beginners make, you know. I hope this video helped, you know. I hope it helped you realize maybe some faults that you have within your beginner mindset. And yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. If you have something to say, leave a comment. If you want to see more, subscribe to the channel, share this video with your pet crocodile, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.